So I recognize this may be a bit off character for me, but I wanted to make a video to really recognize a bunch of the work that's been done this year in the community, specifically around CT creation. Especially for comp players, I feel like we oftentimes kind of turned a little bit of a blind eye, and maybe I'm kind of rare in this, but I actually really enjoy looking at this type of stuff. So as a sort of way of saying my thanks, I wanted to make a video for this to recognize the top 30 CTs of the year. There's no script for this. Sorry if it sounds like shit. It's not getting edited really either. At least super well. I just spent a bit of time on like transitions and shit, but you get the idea. It's gonna be a little off the cuff, it's gonna be a little here or there, so just bear with me as we go through it. Aside from just the top 30 tracks also, we're gonna be doing 6 awards, woo! For the authors and tracks, respectively, who I think did really good in specific categories. For starters, best upcoming author. New author who's really cemented themselves well on the scene. Best visual design, a track that, you know, just looks the best, at least in my opinion. I'm not really a great judge on that, am I? But, you know, I do my best. Best driving design, a track I thought was really, really fucking cool to drive and mess around on. A lot better than I thought it was going to be originally. Best theme design, a track that really just nails a theme and runs with it. I know it's a little open-ended, but I don't want to give away any hints yet. Best track design, this is more aimed towards comp, but best competitive track, if you would. And obviously best author of 2023. Anyways, keep in mind, 2-hour video here, so strap in, get some food and drink, and enjoy yourselves. So, I made a promise to myself when I was selecting my top 30 tracks to not choose any tracks that were not super well-rounded necessarily or not super fleshed out. I think this is, and this isn't a flame on the track again, but this is on that like little borderline, right? It's not necessarily the most interesting gameplay, especially for the first 2 laps, right? There's really 2 things that I think make this track stand out really, really well. So, for starters, we're going to see it here when we turn back around this corner, but if you look to your right, you're going to see that little reflection right there. It's actually reflective. I'm not sure what the KCL type is or what, but there is something that authors are freaking out about after this track came out because that allows you to now have reflections in a lot of your work. And as you can see here from the other side, it's actually see-through, so it's almost like a one-way mirror, right? So there's some interesting visual tech there. It's not necessarily like gameplay oriented or anything, but the second part certainly is about this track. That being said, we'll see this effect that's used here used later on to really good effect on one of my favorite tracks actually of the year. So keep that in mind for later on. But the really cool part is you can see here's that mini map. Like, what the fuck? When I saw this, because this was a jam track, that like it actually made me like gasp almost. It was like, what the fuck am I looking at, man? Like, it's just another mini map sliding over. It turns out that's just a texture that he projects over the track. Same with the original minimap. There actually is no true minimap, if you would, on this track. And this section opens up here, and again, is it super well textured? I mean, it's the same rock texture pretty much everywhere on the walls, right? And the same stuff on the rails and all that, and the same road texture, but it's so much more about the creativity of the concept and design here that makes this track really interesting to me. Like, this was done in a jam. This isn't like this is done over several weeks or anything of trying to figure out how to make stuff work. This is like, nah bro, fuck it, we ball, we found something really interesting we want to mess with, and, you know, we designed something around it. But I think it works really, really fucking well for what it's trying to do here. And again, I said I wouldn't choose like a gimmick track or whatever. And while this track isn't necessarily like, wow, amazing gameplay or any of that, I think like the idea and the actual shock that I had when I saw the minimap roll over like that, I mean, it had to be on this list. There was no way I couldn't put it on. And I think Lucio is just one of those authors who can do that, right? We've seen that with all his like fucking Lakitu quizzes and shit. right? Really fucking wild tracks. I'd highly recommend you go check those out if you haven't already, because they are some incredibly funny experiences if you want to just fuck around on some random CTs and have fun, a good time. He's an incredibly talented author. I'm super excited to see him finish his work up on Toad's Temple soon with Tarsa. Great stuff here, man. A very creative track to start off this list, to say the least. At first, I didn't actually realize this was a Yoros track. It doesn't necessarily feel like his style, but I like the sort of vibe he's going for. Originally, the design, which actually makes a lot more sense in hindsight, was designed by Kevin VG in a CT Jam. I'm pretty sure it was a quite early CT Jam as well. So the fact that this is being brought up at least recently for a revival by Yoros is very interesting for me to see. This spiral specifically here, that side trick tech is super satisfying to do. You go a lot tighter with, I think it's a right side trick there. And just that sort of like, I know people don't necessarily think about that, especially authors, but having sort of tech like that, at least for me, really makes a section that, might not be the most interesting come to life, because otherwise it would just be like a little trickable spiral, and admittedly, the topology is really cool looking there, right? But adding that side trick, at least for me, it brings it a lot more live. And this ending section too, I've seen a lot of like bumpiness and stuff, and people normally complain about that, but at least for me, it feels very, very controllable, and I'm not very good at this track because I didn't spend enough time on it, right? But that section was very, very fun to drive, and I imagine like once you get a good hang on it, the bumpiness is one of those ones where it almost feels like an RT where you can kind of use it to your advantage long term. But anyways, enough about sort of the gameplay and stuff. Let's focus on the visuals. This like very much almost reminds me of Lost Ruins in a lot of ways. Obviously, it's a bit brighter and not as like foggy and all that, but at least for me, right, like the sort of red skybox, it feels very foreboding almost, and that sort of like theming that you're able to get off the track is really nice. But unlike Lost Ruins, right, I think like the gameplay on this one especially is going to be a lot more varied. Lost Ruins is meant to be like RPG, right? It's meant to be like, this is your shroom cut on the track, and then the rest of the track you're supposed to have a lot of player interaction, whereas with this one, it's actually a fair bit more divided. Admittedly, there's a lot of stuff that you can shroom at the end, right? Unlike maybe like a Lost Ruins track would have, but just also like this beginning section here, there's a lot of different places where you can sort of like make these sort of mini cuts or whatever, just to kind of keep the race more engaged, which I think will actually play quite well, especially with the spiral coming up here. Again, right, this isn't necessarily a finish at this point, right? But even if it's like was the final version, I'd still love to play this track some more in CGP. It really, really does fucking well, and at least for me, I think the division for it, especially with that like additional shroom cut there, right? That, like the way that it splits itself up will make it like a really balanced, nice track. I think of tracks that have done really well over this last year, tracks like Supermarine, and I could see this being quite similar to that in terms of how the track splits up its cuts and its driving. The lack of trickability there as well for the wheelie is really nice. I appreciate that. I'm always a fan of wheeling instead of tricking. So having that nice little touch there is good. Great work here, Yoros, and I'm excited to see what stuff you have in store for us for 2024. The first time I saw this track, I was absolutely thrown in for a trip. Like, you have this big guy with googly eyes, and there's eyes pretty much everywhere inside of his mouth or something, and Dude, I don't know what I was even looking at. I still honestly don't really understand it, but aside from that, like, the actual track driving is incredible here. You get some really sweet low there. That infeed that you can get there off the side is incredibly smooth, although you are tilt locked, unfortunately, for the rest of the track. These Shroomless cuts, some people bitch about and complain about. I don't understand it, bro. They're so free. Like, just go a bit wide. They're really, really easy. This Shroom cut at the end of the track, in earlier versions, it was very inconsistent. I think in this version, you can still get very high air sometimes, and maybe that's a skill issue, maybe it's not. I don't quite know at this point. Because this run is on a very old version of the track, which is why the water current's slower. Regardless, though, in terms of gameplay and driving, this is one of like the wonkier traps. I'd compare it to like a Lumpy's, if you would. For those of you who are familiar with Lumpy's Lively Layer, it's got a bunch of that weird sort of jank aspect that, I mean, at least for me, I actually really appreciate, especially in this sense. That little Shroomless cut there, as well, they don't actually save as much time as it would look, and you're able to get a box if you go around, so you don't have to sweat about just taking those only. Anyways, more shit about the track, I guess, visually here. At least for me, I really like the Wetland Woods almost-esque theme of just having all the water sections for that middle part of the track, even though I guess it isn't technically the end. It felt to me a lot like Wetland Woods. But admittedly, Wetland Woods is shit. All my homies hate Wetland Woods, and this is a lot better than Wetland Woods, so I would love to see, Wetland Woods go at some point, so this could be the main water flow track left in the pack. Anyways, there's also a Mega Box you can get on a top route. You can consistently get it if you have a Shroom. It's pretty fun, I must say. The entirety of this track is really fun, so I highly recommend you guys go try this out. It's in the pack now, so if you haven't already, go play it. It is very, very fun. Good job, TL. It was a nice track to play, man. Another jam track here with Mystical Mushroom Mine. This one was incredibly interesting for me to play through, at least like on a completely blind playthrough, because while I had watched the video, I hadn't actually played it that much. That intro right there for that cut is actually quite challenging and pretty fun. I like the fact that it's no trick. Leads to some interesting gameplay, but that's pretty much like the main feature for the track in terms of gameplay, aside from a falling rock, that if you go around that shroom cut there, you actually can use the top route by the zipper. If you go look off to our left, once we enter this cut here, you'll see what I'm talking about. But enough about that. If we want to focus on the visual aspects really fast of this track, this is pretty common for Shorky tracks. I don't know how he does it, but he's able to turn out these really good visuals in just a matter of a couple days, because it's the jam, right? There's a reason he pretty much always wins, and I think that's one of the main reasons why. He's just, I don't know, very, very talented at cranking out good visuals really fast. ZPL is a similar thing for a lot of his tracks. We'll be addressing that later with one of his tracks, but Shorky here did it incredibly well, especially for jam standards. This is just really, really good, man. But yeah, I would like to see ideally more mushroom tracks like this at some point, because I'm not usually a huge fan of the mushroom tracks, but that cute little like mushroom theming almost, and I don't even know what you're going to call this underneath the mushroom top right there. I think it was actually like a really nice way to make a track that's themed around mushrooms without having a bunch of mushroom pads everywhere, because I feel like they always do, right? But great job here, just keeping the theme nice, short, simple, and sweet too. So often these tracks can kind of just drag on, but keeping it really short, it's a nice change, and I feel honestly, while a lot of the tracks this year that were amazing were really long, there's always a good place for these shorter ones. Amazing stuff, man. speaking of short tracks, here we have a 7-lap short track by Metabus, something I don't think any of us saw coming before the release. This really is wild though, and honestly, like, this is how Baby Pork should be. I'm just gonna say it as it is. I think this track, it does what Metabus kind of does with SGLC, and we'll get more into that later when we get around to it, because obviously that's on the list. You guys expect it not to be? But SGLC does a similar thing where the tech isn't super necessary. Like on this track, it's not like you need to know all the tech. The fastest shroom cut is this one, for God's sake. Like it's the shroom right through the middle, right? There's a fun little shroom cut you can do to land on that grass section up there as well. You can land a little rail to save an extra time. There's nothing like essential though that you need to know for this track. The main cool thing also is you can take both laps, or both routes rather, regardless of your lap. You can go left path, you can go right path, which would ideally cause interesting player interaction. I think that the main shortfalling though for this is that it's really hard to force players to take one route or the other. You can't just make them all go right route sometime or all left route, or at least naturally. Maybe if there was some way to incorporate that, it would be a bit higher on the ranking, but as is, I think that's the main like gameplay shortfall, and visually, I've always loved the, whatever they are, the cherry blossom pink trees. So whenever I see those on a track, it already goes up in my book. And again, visually, it's a Metabus track, so what do you expect? It looks beautiful, man. There's nothing really else to say about it. It's got that gong that gets hit as well. Really, really cool animation style here. And just the track is really simple, short and sweet, and I wish it was in CGP because it's quite funny as is, but oh well. Great stuff, man. I really loved seeing this from you this year. So, this track is truly one of the most bizarre I think I've seen of the entire year, for many different reasons. For starters, everyone always asks, why the hell is it named the Great Apple War? That really is just a kind of crazy name, right? So I guess the lore behind it was made in the author server. I'm not sure if it was Jams or a different server, but there was a constant raging debate about which color of apples was best, red or green. And obviously being green, we ended up having the best part of the track be the green section. That little spiral there at the beginning is just truly an incredible spiral. There's a lot of different like shroom and shroomless cuts that you can take, so many that like each of them actually saves similar amounts of time. And you can only take usually one at a time per lap, right? And so if someone tries to block one, you can just take a different one. There's a lot of different like outplay and maneuvers and stuff there. We also have the main shroom cut of the track there be on the green section. Keep in mind this is not the final version of the track that I TT'd here. This was an earlier one, so that, for example, that shroom cut no longer shoots you up really high in the air. But again, this track is quite the collaboration as well. I mentioned earlier it was brought up in the Jam server, but basically every author who wanted to collab with this had the opportunity to. So I think there's currently like 20 or so authors listed on the author page for this. If you actually want to get your name featured, if you go and get feedback or substantial like help or whatever, I'm pretty sure Tarsus is just looking to add people to the list at this point still, to be the most authored track in history, if you will. So if you're interested in any of that, feel free to shoot her a DM. I'm sure she'd be willing to listen to feedback or whatever at that point. But anyways, track's really, really fun. Got some nice, easygoing tech in this track too. Nothing too complicated. Driving's pretty smooth. My only issues were there was some not very fun bounces that you could probably notice in this run. Most of those have gotten patched out. I guess that's just kind of the issue when you have 20 different people working on a track. You don't really have anyone trying to go back through and brush up the sections where one author was working on one thing and another one was. Because I guess like the parts of transition would lead to a lot of issues in the track. Regardless, though, I think for what pretty much is a meme track, right, it does very, very well. And it's got some interesting stuff too, including those bombs you probably just saw exploding there at the end. Great work to however many on. I don't even know, man. Too many people worked on this shit. Funny track, though, and I'm really excited to see this get into the pack soon. I'm not sure if there was some Paper Mario convention before the start of the year here that I ended up missing out on, because this was one of the, I think 3 courses that got into the pack this year, or I guess it will, because it hasn't been fixed up yet, but one of the 3 acceptances we've had this year based on Paper Mario. So I guess new creators out there, if you're looking for something cool, I guess Paper Mario really has a home here in CGP. Anyways, but more about the actual track. I've never actually gone on my way to play Jaden tracks before, but if all of them drive like this, I should probably be playing them some more. The spiral is a little bit tricky, but it's very, very, very satisfying when you do it well. This Shroomless here was designed so there's multiple ways to take it, so that you don't actually have to worry about somebody placing a single item on it and knocking you off because of lag or whatever, right? There's a lot of different ways to take that section. Little wheelie there into the trick as well. This opening section is actually not that much slower to go on the bottom. I know it may look a little bit daunting, but the outlines are pretty strong on this one, and as a result of development, there was also a shroom cut that was added, because there was originally just one on this track, but we wanted to add, I'm sure you saw it was the one I took already, but we wanted to add one more just up here. It doesn't save too much, so it'll still be a very running-oriented track, but right there to the right, you can wheelie up and actually show it up on lap 3, but again, right, the actual balance for this track is quite well done, especially for somebody who I don't think Jaden's ever released a track in CGP, much less talking with competitive about it releasing a track, right? So for a first attempt, this really is an incredible job. But I think what really justified this track being in my top 30 was this section here. I really, really love the use of Twisted Way here. I think it's the first time we've ever seen it on a CT. To teleport is a little janky, but I really hope Jaden reconsiders and puts this in the CGP version, because that is just so fucking cool, man. It's such a fucking meme of a section to do, but it honestly adds so much life to the track. At least for me, it's if you have that there, as stupid and as dumb as it can be, it provides a lot of comedy and a lot of humor to races. And I really hope that stays in, because that's some of the coolest shit I've ever seen in a while. Really good work here, Jaden. I'm super happy to get one of your first tracks ever in the pack, should you manage to update it before the 6-month thing, because, again, this is really fucking good, man. So once Bear decided to wake up from his year or 2 long hibernation and drop this track, I was at least very excited. One of the main reasons probably being this track has some incredibly interesting artwork, especially inside the cave section. I don't know why, but Bear has this really good talent, and we've seen this before even in the past with stuff like Water Village, for this very unique visual style, right? And I think the cave is a really good example of that. There's a lot of almost, I think they're meant to be caveman drawings of bears and random symbols. I'd highly recommend you take a look at it. At least visually, though, this track has a lot to offer, and I can see it being in the pack for a very long time just based on that alone. Some gameplay stuff, though, to bring up, because there's some truly funny stuff going on this track. I don't have a clip of it here because I don't want to waste my time trying to do something, but there is a little shroomless you can do here off this ramp. to get onto the top path with a side trick. I guess that's kind of cool. It's not my cup of tea, but it's definitely there and it's viable. So if you wish to go try that, go for it. Those are cows that I just drove through, retextured as bears, which at least I find to be quite funny. Multiple shroom cuts on this track. This is a quintessential, like, you know, grassy sort of circuit track almost that actually drives really well and has some interesting sort of theming to it. You can get stuck there in the ramp from the side, which is really, really fun because it actually gives you low air off that ramp gun. And there's this nice little water current. I'm not sure if it actually adds any speed or not, but it does feel quite nice to drive through that section, albeit the first turn prior to that's a little bit bumpy. That being said, like, this track is a very nice example of simple is better, right? Overall, this year was quite overwhelming, I would say, with the amount of stuff I'm sure creators felt like they had to kind of pander towards with tech and driving and creativity and all of that. And while, you know, ultimately those tracks really are incredible stuff, tracks like this are just as important for the pack, especially long term, or really any sort of pack, right? Because if you're able to have tracks like this, players who aren't necessarily super, like, competent with driving, or players that are more casual, or, for example, RT players in comp, right, are much more able to adapt to tracks like this, as opposed to tracks like Melting or whatever, right? So this is overall quite the nice track. And at least for me, I think it's a great intro sort of for CTs for this year, because this was released quite early. So good job, Bear. It's really nice playing this one. So this is Brofan's first track that he managed to get into CGP, and it really shows the amount of effort that he put into this. For those of you that don't remember, I think the first time I saw this, at least personally, was a Mero video back in, like, was it 2022? It feels like ages ago. So again, this track was made quite a while ago, or at least relatively. Obviously it's not super ancient or anything, but the development cycle for this has been very long, and especially for an author who hasn't created a ton of tracks, I think it's quite rare to see someone stick with it, so very commendable for the amount of time and effort you put into this. The actual track design now, to address that part, is also quite interesting. There's a nice little one shroom cut here right at the very beginning, sort of similar to Infernal, where it's after first set, so lap 1 people aren't going to be able to take it to catch up, so first can ideally hold their line. That being said, the actual cut in this video looks a bit jankier than it actually is. It's not going to be that bouncy, and there's a 2-shroom cut as well we just passed, you can see on the mini-map, which actually has really good design, especially, again, for a new creator. Normally when people make these sorts of cuts, it can lead to pretty massive TSs when it takes you on an alternate route like that, because you're actually shrooming through the cut, except for like 5 seconds after you commit to that alt path, but because of the additional placement of an item set up there and a little ramp that you can bail out, you can actually make it so if you're TS there, it's not the end of the world. You can get back on the track, or even just chain for more shrooms and you'll be fine. But yeah, the point is for a first-time creator, there's a lot of extra thought put into this track that I think normally you wouldn't necessarily see. So it's got some really, really cool stuff going, and I mean, Brofan, I know you're making more tracks, man, especially because Rooster Allen's coming out in what? I already did, actually. Shit. I saw the video even yesterday. I don't know why I'm making that mistake, but I mean, you're going to make a ton of new tracks hopefully this next year, and if you do, I'd love to see you continue on and hopefully finish and submit this, because please, dude, I don't want to have to 6-month this. This is 100% worthy to get into the pack, and I want to see more of it. Great stuff, man. this track really did go the extra mile to bring an amazing environment back to an old school track. This is for the Jam to remake old CTs. Someone can tell me what that is later, but anyways, this is based on the original Thunder City. And for those of you that don't know, that is a comp staple track. So as soon as Fuff took this on, there was a lot of responsibility on his shoulders to really make a good version. I think he delivered quite well with it. There was just so much stuff about the original version of this track that had to kind of be reworked, and honestly, I think it's essential. Like, there's no way you could have gotten around it with however much like jank and stuff there was on the original version. There still is a lot of it here, right? But just like the stuff like you would bypass an out of bounds planes with a weird ramp that would save like 3 seconds. Really weird and kind of just like inconvenient slow ramps and stuff out of the cannon there. And people would say, oh, it's stack or whatever, but it's like, dude, the whole thing is you're skipping them all anyways. Right? Like, it doesn't matter if they're there or not. There's a nice little addition for Creative Liberty there of a lap 2 path that makes that shroom once understood there a bit easier. I think it also gives access to an extra box over there. Not to mention, the section up here coming up has that really interesting sort of style slip and that shroom cut that you can get. Which was not present, obviously, in the old version of the track. There was no shroom cut on this track. But this shroom cut here is very, very difficult, yet quite interesting to take, and I think it adds a nice little layer of depth, especially for a reimagination of an old track. The only thing I would like to say that I would like to ideally see changed, that there is a bit restricted out of bounds off of one of the lows on the ramp, and I'll mention when we're coming up here, but again, visually, like, this track is incredible, and it does a lot of justice to Thunder City. And this is the ramp that I'm talking about here. If you load this too well, it counts you out of bounds, which probably should get changed, but I don't know. We'll give it some time. Regardless, though, the addition to the helicopters, the little rain animation that you have going around your character, the lightning that you can see off from the distance, the very like gloomy sort of atmosphere, I think fits Thunder City absolutely perfectly. And I'd really, really love to see more of this shit done in the future, because like there's so much potential in these old tracks, especially which we'll address more of later. But like having these sort of reimaginations and stuff where authors are able to have a lot of leeway with their sort of design while staying faithful to the originals is just immense potential for a lot of future tracks. Great work here, Fuff. So this is a track that is made by a relatively new creator, Funky Racer, and this guy I'd only seen a couple times, and he's been doing this track for a very, very long time. And I've been honestly quite surprised with the amount of improvement I've seen in this track. I would honestly say it's probably one of like the most improved tracks over the entire year. He's taken a lot of really good feedback into the track, and it's really just made it honestly one of the most fun tracks, at least personally, on a driving level for this entire year. It turned from a track that had like a lot of different like KCO mismatch issues and stuff like that, especially with the stairs, into a really well fleshed out track that I'm super excited to have into the pack hopefully this next upcoming year. Like, this has probably been, especially for like a new creator, I can imagine it's very daunting trying to get into the scene, and I think Funky Racer's done an incredible job here, especially on this track, just especially in that regard, because it can be very disheartening, right? But he's stuck with it through thick and thin, and it's been, probably almost a year at this point, so I'm very excited to see this get in. But anyways, as for visuals and stuff, I really, really love the sort of idea for a Toadette theme track. Haven't had any of those yet, so the pink is much appreciated, and I actually do like the idea for the sort of darkness inside of the castle. It feels almost like a Jasper track, with the sort of theme that's going on there. And this outside garden too feels very much like Peach Gardens. I'm not sure if it's from the game or not, but it definitely feels like it in a lot of different ways. But let's talk about the gameplay a bit. There is several different shroom cuts that you can be taking on this track. So again, the balance actually for the gameplay is quite well. That indication too, I didn't mention it there, but there's a little explosion mark on the ground when that fireball explodes. It's just really subtle, but a nice way for players to know when the fireball will blow up. There's a shroom cut right here to the left, just through that little flower patch, and there's a shroom cut which I'll be actually showcasing right up here with this little dirt wood path here. It's quite a nice one to take as well. The exit's really clean, and that following turn as well with the topology is really, really nice to hop over. But again, right, like, the actual gameplay, I think, for this track is going to be decently run heavy, and we have another split path. Yet again, that we have only seen around probably, I don't know, 50% or so of the track so far. I've had a really nice split path, and this is another good example. Only going bottom path, I think, on this run. You can also land on that top path for a shroom cut you can see there through the mud. Again, there's a lot of nice, simple creativity here, and just like a couple of the other tracks, there isn't anything super overwhelming about this. This is very friendly for first playthroughs and for just trying to learn the game. So, if you are someone who is not super into just like trying out tough or complicated CTs, I think this is one of the tracks for you. That little shroom cut at the end is a bit tricky, but aside from that, like, very beginner-friendly track, and especially for a first track, really, really good, and good work by the author as well to stick with this, because I know it can be overwhelming. Great work, Funky Racer. For one of Chris's first solo efforts that we get to see, I was really blown away by this track when I first saw it. There's a lot of really funny stuff that goes on this track, including some zipper abuse we get to see here right off the bat, where you can get some off-road immunity off this. Also, shoutouts to Boodog for giving me a couple runs here. I wasn't able to get a couple of my runs recorded because they were on intermediate versions of tracks and they kind of just poofed. So again, thanks for the run here as well. This section up here with the pirate ship actually splits into 3 separate paths, and there's merits to taking 2 of them, which is more than you can normally say about most CTs. So a nice little split path section where you can get boxes on one route and speed on another route. Similar thing here as well. There's boxes on the right, or you can take this path over here on the left. And this shroom cut is super unique as well, because you're actually supposed to try to get a neutral bounce off of it to get air to clear the rest of the off-road there, which is, I mean, I would say a pretty rare thing to see, especially on CTs. The only neutral bounce I can really think of aside from like hop dodging and stuff is on Delfino Island for that little shroomless, if you want to do it that way. Anyways, super unique cut, and we got some very niche sort of things, if you will, on this track. On the front of this pirate mast up here, right to our right, there's actually a single red shell box there as well online to try to red people out of shrooms and stuff if you're going around the cut in first place. This actual Goomba texture here as well, I'd like to draw the attention to. They all look like little pirates, which I thought was quite cute and very fun. But again, I think one of the strong points for this track is just the amount of alt lines that there are in it. There's so many different ways to take each section, and it flows really well because of it. There's just like, I don't know, one of the main issues with alt lines in the past is that, or all paths even, especially for like split areas, is that either it's really imbalanced, so one route's impossible to take, or like it's very blockable or whatever, right? But I think, honestly, Gallant Rotor does one of the best jobs in terms of just balancing out the paths. It's really well done and designed here to make sure that people are able to take any pack they pretty much want without losing a significant amount of time. It really is one of the more interesting tracks I think we've seen this entire year in terms of split path usage. Really good job, Chris. track that's made in a CT Jam, this track has just an incredible amount of depth. It's a 4-lap track with alternate routes for each lap, which is, I don't even know how that's like possible. I know this jam was done in like 9 days, or it was an extended jam or jelly. So I guess jellies and jams are different things. But it was extended jelly regardless, though. Like, just very, very impressive, the entire like scope of this project, especially for how little time was put into it. The only real complaints I have about this is just like minor KCL issues, but in terms of like ideas, I really hope this stays 4 laps. I heard it's potential to make it 3, but please keep it 4. I don't think I've even seen a 4-lap track in any pack really that's been even remotely as polished as this, and it's honestly, it fits quite well considering you go back from right path to left path to right path to left path each time. And the cool thing about this track also is it's not just like each path is like its own unique section. It actually combines, like laps 1 and 3 have very similar parts of it, and laps 2 and 4 also do, but they add some separate ways to take the routes, if you would. So the fact that it's like not necessarily just perfectly unique, but they actually incorporate sections makes it a lot easier for a player to follow along with. Like, for example, here you recognize, oh, it's the same stairs that we saw from the lap 1 section, right? And we'll notice the same stuff as well with lap 4 and lap 2. But it makes it a lot easier for someone just to be able to sight read this and pick it up really easily, which is super nice, especially if you're if you don't want to spend a lot of time learning a track with like 4 unique paths. Right? It makes it a lot easier on the player to just sight read, which is incredibly important with this type of stuff. Nice little 2 shroom cut here. I actually do it to avoid the pace lock because the cycles weren't exactly prepped for this, and same with this shroom cut here. Very funny shroom cut, by the way, not optimal at all, but it helps me avoid the pace lock. Regardless though, right, like there's a lot of really, really just interesting stuff as well on this track, especially for a jam. One of my favorite parts about this track, in terms of like in terms of tech, is this ramp coming up here. Just being able to like get this super weird like sort of angle off this with a little TF leads you perfectly for this. It looks really clean and it's super satisfying to drive. So what the point of this is that I really hope that Strobens and crew here decides to keep this 4 laps, because 4-lap tracks are so rare, man. And you got something incredible here, and I wouldn't want to cut anything out of this at all. As is right now. I think you guys really do have like a perfect layout, and I'd just love to see this get a little bit more fleshed out in terms of the KCL, and then eventually get submitted, because this 100% gets an incredible track, especially for a jelly all. One of the best I've seen in a while, especially as like this is the end of the jelly form, right? There was no work done after this. Great stuff. Kicking this off, another track from CT Jam here. Wario's Climate Cataclysm has been in a couple other packs for a while, and I had my first chance to play it in Luminous, and it really struck me that I had never heard of this track before, but it really actually does kick a lot of ass. This shroom cut, for example, right here is relatively unique, and I love the fact that when you land on the ice rock, if you try to adjust your alignment at all, you won't be able to get your wheelie out, which means you can't actually make the cut. So you really have to have like a good, decisive angle before entering that. If you don't, you're not going to get your wheelie and you'll be off the track. You're off the shroom again. Into this next part of the track, though, as well, that shroomless that we just passed there on that ice section is really definitive. Saves about 3 seconds or so, and whenever we get to play this online, that shroomless defines the track. Not to mention, there's one more shroomless that's viable lap 3. You can maybe catch it off the left here. There's a little ending strat there, which isn't blockable from my understanding. There's multiple ways you can take it, so you don't have to worry. It's not like some Desert Fort thing where people are going to block the ramp or whatever. Anyways, more about the track, though, now, like, thematically. I appreciate the fact that it's segmented into very separate sections of the track. So, for example, we have the little grass area at the start, very pleasant, relaxing area. And then the climate starts to have its cataclysm, I guess, and there's the fiery lava section followed by ice, back into the the lava, debris, whatever, bridge shit. And it's the fact that it's segmented, at least for me, brings a lot of interest between each of the sections, because if it's all themed exactly the same, it usually doesn't have that same sort of pizzazz, if you will, for each of the sections. It just feels very similar, which, I mean, this track does very, very well at avoiding. Not to mention, also there's the little split path as well at the beginning with the path switch, which at least for me was one of the most enjoyable parts of the track too, because there's a lot of different ways you can take this. This type path's obviously almost always faster, especially with this path switch, but diving off here to the left with an MT is slightly faster than going for the trick there as well. Nice little shroom cut there on the side as well if you want to cut off a little bit, and obviously this one is the cut for big boys, so to speak, on this track. There's a little shroom there to the right you can see as well, but usually that's a lot easier if you don't take that shroom cut. So there's a little bit of counterbalance there for people who want to go around and just drive at shroomless because they're on a top spot. They'll be able to take an extra shroomless that usually people out of that cut won't be able to take, especially if it's online, they get bounced or whatever. More off-road cuts and stuff at the ends too. So this track, I mean, I think will be very balanced online in terms of like running and bagging. There'll be fair potential for every sort of playstyle on this. And on that note, like, I don't know what to say other than this jam specifically, we'll see a few more tracks in it from later, really did fucking well this year, so I'd love to see some more theming around like Fire and Ice or something similar. Jams are definitely something to watch out for. Great work here, Shorky and Yoshi. The thing that's craziest to me about this track is the actual reception it has gotten from the competitive scene. So, those of you who don't know, it's kind of an open secret at this point, but a lot of comp players really don't like tracks by ZPL. But this was put in, ideally, the hardest update for this track to do well, if that makes sense. We had some truly incredible tracks for this December update, some of the best I've ever seen, right? And this was among them, and I was thinking to myself, this track's gonna be absolutely just shit on. As much as I enjoy it, like it's gonna not do super well with comp, but I've been proven entirely wrong. This has actually been one of the best performers in the most recent update, more so than tracks that I expected to do far better, which is so weird and out of style for comp to like enjoy a ZPL track over all the rest. So I think that just goes to show like how incredible this track is, especially for like what ZPL's used to doing. ZPL's not necessarily a normal CT creator, right? You imagine him as like a retro sort of designer, but honestly, when I see tracks like this in Mystic, I kind of wish he did more like original CT designs. And we'll talk about design right now. For example, this shroomless cut here, well, it does save a bit of time. It misses an item set, and if you have shrooms or something in a bottom spot and you're trying to chain for a star, you can take a little off-road cut at the start there. This is the biggest cut on the track right there. There's a little gap cut you can do to the right as well, but none of the cuts on this track actually save a ton of time, or at least none of the shroom cuts. So it leads to a very interesting sort of dilemma where actually people are going to have to worry about player interaction. There's not a lot of big shortcuts, which is, I mean, I would say typical for a ZPL track. You'd expect there to be some pretty big shroom cuts. Not on this one, so pretty interesting stuff already. There's some cool shroomless tech as well. You can hit the side of this pipe to get low air, and you can do it off the ramp as well. Unfortunately, I don't do it in this run because I didn't know about it at the time, but there's some incredibly cool air time you can get off those. Not to mention, this shroomless at the end. Normally people don't like shroomless cuts because they're very easy to block. You can do this from practically any section of the ramp. Not to mention, you can do it using the stunt part wide on the little like highlighted blue part, and you also get on, and that part is actually viable while small too. So if the shock happens before there, you can align for that and take it, and there's a very strong TS too in that ending section. So as weird as it might be to imagine we're in some like parallel universe or something, ZPL has actually created like one of the most competitive tracks of the year with Aqua Dungeon here. So I mean, Dude, I don't know what you were thinking, Zach, but congratulations on doing what I'm sure you thought was probably impossible at one point or another. And really, I didn't mention this either, but this spiral is the best spiral I've ever driven. I think the only one that's like kind of contested on that is Redwood Village by Lucio. But that one there is, dude, I don't know how you did it, but it's so fucking smooth. Please make all of your spirals like that. It is just really fucking good. And yeah, I mean, I know this, I've said this like 100 times already, but you've genuinely made one of the best competitive tracks of the year, man. It's so weird. I bet you don't believe it yet, but trust me, it's done really fucking good, and you should be super proud of yourself. Amazing stuff, man. Really good track. This is the second track that we're seeing from the Fire and Ice CT Jam, probably the best jam of all time, if I had to comment on that. But again, this is one of those tracks that I didn't really expect necessarily to do super well, but has done quite well in competitive. I know we've already talked about that and kind of addressed that with the Aqua Dungeon one, but this one, to a lesser extent, I had a similar feeling about. One of the cooler things, though, that we have with this, especially after we decided to change that other cuts to a 2-shroom cut, was adding that that sort of 1 shroom cut there with the lake cut, because it adds a diverse shroom strat for every single lap. One lap you'll use 2 shrooms in TTs, one lap you'll use 1 shroom, another lap you use 0. So in terms of TT strats, especially when we have cycles like these stompers right here, being able to have your own sort of cycle reduction tool by having different shroom strats will lead to a lot of very nice diversity, at least in TTs, for all levels of skill, so you never feel like you have to get base locked. And that's just like a gripe I have with a lot of tracks with base locks. But anyways, on to more stuff with this track. The one thing that I really think could have done a bit better was that bumpy turn right there. I don't know why that was made super bumpy, but yeah, it's a little bit too bumpy to the point where you just can't consistently get many turbos. That's my only complaint, though. The pipe is super fucking cool. Easily like my favorite part of the track. I really think it's well designed. It's got some cool shit on it. That being said, this section right here, the one we're about to go into for the split path as well, is very well designed. I like the fact that you get to wheelie over one of the ramps right there, and you get to wheelie over this ramp, and that's optimal. It's really nice to have ramps where you're just spamming trick over, and you actually get to like choose to go for wheelies on. And this little shroomless here, it's nice, simple, short and sweet, and it leads to a really nice theme for the track. The visuals as well do quite well to complement the sort of Metroid theme. We haven't had a Metroid track ever before, and I really hope Fuff is able to finish an update for this week, get this pushed back into the pack ASAP, because it's a really good track. Good work, both Fuff and ISC here. It's a really nice addition. After Fluffy took a brief hiatus from the Lumpies debacle, I was a little concerned that he may not return. He was actually working on this track quite a while ago under the name Rumbly Tumbly Road, but now that it is fully evolved into Bluster Blob Bluff, we have an entirely new theme for the track. It's themed in this sort of icy area where we're able to drive around in a lot of different water currents. Now, the actual water currents people are usually a bit afraid about, especially in a balancing scene where we're not able to shroom up on, for example, a spiral here. We're getting some DMS flashbacks, but there is actually a lot of different other features of the track that balanced out quite well. The heavy ice for Sherbet Land allows you to shroom and gain even more time than you normally would over a fair bit of the track. And not to mention, a lot of these water currents aren't necessarily moving the racer forward, which is a huge change from what we used to see. I think the first real noticeable instance of that was on Jungle Glade that we saw Citrus do, but now we're able to see it throughout the vast majority of the track. Even this like very beginning area, it's on for what, 3-4 seconds? You have it on the last straight too. It's not just moved to push the racer forward or backwards, it's really being used in an innovative way to push them sideways as well. So outside of that though, right, it's actually like a pretty boilerplate track. There's a lot of very simple sort of fluffy shenanigans that you see going on here, and I think we can all appreciate that for what it is. And I really love the lighting, especially in this section here with the carcass for whatever, I think it was supposed to be a dinosaur? I guess the geometry doesn't necessarily add up for it anyways, but very cool stuff. We also have a fluffy Easter egg on this track that I won't necessarily spoil, but it is very, very funny, and I 100% recommend spending your time looking around on this. But yeah, I think people might be tempted to throw this track aside for being too easy or too basic or doesn't have a lot necessarily going on, maybe too empty, but I think this is like a perfect example of a track that's maybe simple in idea, but has some interesting stuff to throw in. It doesn't have to be a crazy tech track, whatever, to be enjoyable, right? The actual driving here is very, very satisfying and relaxing, and I can imagine the gameplay online would be very balanced too, especially with just the amount of different ways you can shroom up on this track. You really have to pick and choose when and where you're going to be able to shroom, because a lot of the sections of the track are just a bunch of wind turns that'll be pushing you one way or another, and it might lead to some kind of wonky interactions. But anyways, that's Rumbly Tumbly Road. Not to mention, I forgot to say, this last stick at the end is super sick here, and very, very fun to do. So congratulations, Fluffy, on actually making a track this year. I didn't think you had it in you, but I'm looking forward to seeing what you work on in 2024. Sandy Clocktower really is, I think, one of the best jam tracks I've ever seen, at least in a final state that's released in jams, because this has not gotten much work afterwards, and it really is just incredible how amazing this is, especially considering it was only a two-person co-op between Sharky and Luigi, right? Sandy Clocktower, at least for me, is one of those tracks where there is a very specific part of it that brings it up like 5 or so spots probably on this leaderboard, and there's another one later on that has that similar thing. We'll get to that, but for me it's all about the low trick that you can get off the massive ramp that has a lot of Delfino Island vibes. It's just, I don't even know how to describe it other than incredibly satisfying to get. And that type of like minor tech, I know it's very, very minimal, right? And probably a track designer, or at least their mind, right? But for me, that just brings so much of the TT to life, and it really is super satisfying. And it's coming up right here. If you don't get it though, when you're forced to go around, I still don't think it's that bad. I still think it's actually a pretty satisfying line to drive. As for the rest of the track, it's very, very, very satisfying. The only gameplay thing I think we're really concerned about is that ending cut shroomless, but for all the people complaining about that, I feel like it really is just Sky Grove then, in essence, right? With a very massive TS, minute and a half track or so. So, I mean, the fact that Sky Grove is removed, I guess, even adds more to the reason why this track should eventually be added. And Sky Grove driving is kind of shit, can't lie. So, this is, at least for me, 10 times better in that aspect. And visually, I think I'm just a sucker for desert tracks, so maybe I'm just inclined to vote desert tracks higher. But the actual theme for this is cool, and I didn't realize it until I opened it up in NoClip, but this is on top right now of a massive hourglass. And that's why there's all the sand and stuff floating up in the room. So thematically, the idea to think of, you know, we're going to use the fucking DDR sand pile as an object here that fills up from the bottom of an hourglass is just incredible and really, really good design. I really hope Shorky manages to get this finished up before it gets 6th month, because I really want to see this in the pack as soon as we can. Congratulations and amazing work, guys. for Crafty Castle, I feel like this is actually very against the CT meta of 2023, if you would. When we're looking at a bunch of these tracks that have released, especially in this top 30, we see tracks with a bunch of different tech driving shroomless cuts or difficult shroom cuts, right? And this track, frankly, has none of those. So what exactly makes it so good, right? For me, it's actually just that contrast and the fact that it executes it so well. I TT'd about 30 or so tracks for this entire video. Right, I did a little bit more and opted to not include some, right? But out of all those tracks, I think this was one of the more satisfying and relaxing ones to do. There was some jank with a couple of the turns, but overall, it wasn't like I felt like I was constantly failing on a cut or something like that. It was just pure, like, I'm just gonna get high and I'm gonna enjoy my time, right? And that's what this was. So, at least for me, the fact that there aren't a lot of tracks like that, especially released in 2023, allowed this to have its own sort of niche, if you would, in track releases. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the design that I find really creative, considering it's coming up right now, the use of the RDS drawbridge to force lap paths. Unlike a normal RDS bridge, this isn't on a very short cycle. So this means that ideally, all players in the room are going to be taking the same route every single lap. You can do a little path switch from the top route to the bottom path, but it doesn't save time. So the issues that we see with tracks, especially in competitive, like Amanita Abyss, where people are split for a really long period of time, we won't see here on Crafty Castle. And again, because it's a very simple layout and a simple track, players, especially casual ones, aren't going to feel like they're being just thrown into complete oblivion and having to figure out some new path around the top and only have to do that once a lap. It's a very simple path. It's just a bunch of right turns. It's got a little off-road cut that you can see and hop into. It's very, very simple, and it does its job very well because you're able to throw these experiences at a player without having them be overwhelmed, and especially in a year with, again, this much tech, right? That's just incredibly, incredibly rare. So, good job on that. The actual cuts on this track, too, again, aside from that 2 shroom cut, there's not a lot. There's this 1 shroom cut we're passing here to the side, and there's also like some 1 shroom cut that you can do on the last turn and the first turn. And once again, I didn't mention this in this, but shout out to Sabudog for doing this run, because I lost my run to the Ether. It was on an intermediary version, and I think Tarso was just doing a ton of work on different bug fixes for this, so I'm not able to find it at this point. So we're using his run here, but there's also the shroom cut here to the left. Point is, very, very simple track. If you're like an RT player, or a player that doesn't really play CTs a lot, I think this is going to be one of your favorite tracks of the year, just because it takes, zero knowledge about CTs or about the track specifically where you need to know about, oh, here's a shroom cut here, a shroom cut here, to actually enjoy it and play well. It's a really incredible job, especially by Tarsa and Fafina and Shorky here, to just keep everything together and make sure that it really matures well as a track, because to release such a simple track this year, I think, is a really daunting challenge, and they did perfectly on it. Good job, y'all. I'm always going to have a bias towards ice tracks and one-lap tracks. At least for me, driving on ice is really fun because you can get slips a lot easier and it leads to some interesting stuff. But that being said, I don't think this is overly high for where it maybe ought to be. And the main reason why is because, at least for me, this felt more like a visual update this year. And mind you, it was a really good visual update, right? But it still didn't change much about the gameplay. I mean, it bug fixed a lot of stuff, sure, but the original design was back from 2019, right? That being said, this is some really incredible visual work and stuff that brought the track to life, and I know I wouldn't be at least enjoying it as much as I am now without it. The actual gameplay of this track too, online, is another one that I really like to enjoy. The name of the game is Get to This Shroomless Cut coming up here first. If you're able to get to that and you're able to block it, you're able to secure yourself a couple second break, right? At least enough for a blue shell or so. And with that in mind, at least a very simple objective for how to play this track. But if you aren't able to get there in time, you're still not necessarily out of the race, especially with a lot of sections like this with the ice. The design of the track's actually really well laid out so that you're able to catch up. But then again, right, people do like to dive off a lot on this track. There are some thin sections to get hit. These boulders coming up are notorious for just absolutely clobbering people off the track, especially with this boost panel. So getting hit by those online is definitely not out of the option, right? But again, if you're able to catch up and have a pretty tight pack near the end, it's actually able to accordion itself, I would say, quite well. And Shock's able to have a pretty big impact, but you need a good room for that to happen. The load that you can get here, I don't get in this run, but it's very, very satisfying. And the fact that the main shroom cuts are at the very end of this track as well, we know that Shocks usually be coming around here, usually lead to some interesting pack shakeup by the end. But if you're able to secure yourself into a top spot, you'd probably hold it for most of the race. Now, for the rest of the track itself, we're just focused less on the gameplay and more on the visual. The actual visual design for this, again, with the ice, and the sort of contrast that you can have between the mine section, or the gold mine section, if you will. I guess that's supposed to be ice here? I don't quite know, but the contrast that you have between the mine section and the outdoor areas, I really, really love, especially with how dark the inside is, versus how bright the outside is, and how it reflects almost off of this ice. It leads to a really sort of cool environment, cool feeling, and I think a lot of that's due to all the work that Bugsy did on the light map here, so great job, Bugsy and Ishiyama and Silver, on your work for Glacier Mine. Well, this track is very, very beautiful and pretty. I think it also is very similar almost to Bowser Jr.'s Crafty Castle that we saw earlier in a lot of ways. This isn't necessarily a super overwhelming track. Most of the shortcuts actually on this track are just off-road cuts, so it's not one that you're necessarily going to get lost on, especially if you're an old player. But unlike on Bowser Jr.'s Crafty Castle, I feel like this one actually does add a fair bit of driving tech, which, at least for me, I'm a bit biased, but I do approve of that, and I do personally enjoy it. The introduction of a split path, which I'm going to kind of nickname as the trait of the year. Last year was the Auroras, and this year is the split path, or rather short split path if you would. Adds a bit of depth to the track because the paths are relatively well balanced. There's item box placements that prevent you, well, no, they don't necessarily prevent you, but they incentivize taking one path over the other. And not to mention, the introduction also of, just at least for me, a very interesting second split path as well, down below, which involves a shroom cut. Then again, unlike a lot of split paths that we've seen before, it's not one that necessarily will confuse the player or they'll get lost on. People can relatively clearly see that you can shroom through the off-road and go into a bottom path, so being able to pick that up maybe on your first or second try for the track isn't necessarily out of the question either, especially for someone who hasn't looked at the track before. There is a shroomless cut as well that we're going through here, rather going past with our shroom. As much as I would prefer, and I told Gabby several times, I think it should have been a no trick. It works perfectly fine with a trick, and it's a great cut. But again, with the rest of the track, it's not meant to be anything crazy, right? And I think it does a perfect job of doing that, especially when we were talking about earlier with Crafty Castle, you know, where there's a lot of the meta and stuff that's developed around a bunch of craziness. This is a track that breathes a lot of fresh air into just a very simple track, and creators who think that they can't create tracks because CTs are getting too complicated or too confusing, just look at this one. I think this is like a perfect example of a track where you can try creating something similar to this. It may not be as good, because I know Gabby's a really fucking good author, right? But you could try creating something in a very similar style here and be able to get away with it, and eventually, I think, get it in the pack, and this is a perfect example of why. The gameplay here isn't jaw-dropping, there's no crazy-ass driving or anything like that. It's just pure, simple lines, and I think everybody really appreciates it for that. Incredible work here, Gabby. We really love the track, and also, I know it's a League reference, you'll have to explain that more to me later, but yeah, great track. If you close your eyes and you picture a Metabus track before this comes out, you wouldn't assume this is him, right? There are no flip ramps on this at all. There are no boost panels. And again, I'm not saying this is like a bad thing or anything. This is just a completely new take on like sort of his brand and what type of tracks he makes. And at least for me, I actually really welcome the change. I think it's very, very fun. This entire track, at least in terms of how it will play online, is centered around two shroom cuts. You have the shroom cut here that we take and the shroom cut at the very beginning of the track, which can be done shroomless on Mach Bike, it turns out. So maybe OJ, if he learned how to do it, would have some sort of copium when Ridge got removed. That being said, this track visually also is very, very cool. It's meant to be based off of, when I was talking with Metabus, I think something similar to like a Dark Souls library is kind of what he wanted to have the theme be based around. And at least for me, I don't play Dark Souls, so I can't really tell on it, but I like the sort of idea that he's going for here with the library. I like Kamek's library. This one actually throws you thrust into a library, and the custom objects just absolutely take the cake. They don't work super well in NoClip, so they don't do them a lot of justice, but my personal favorite is actually coming on up soon. There's I think it's a Shy Guy who's painting like a little Bob Ross afro right on his head, and he's painting an Easter egg from Shy Guy Lumberco. If nobody's done that yet, you gotta go and check that out, because that is an incredible Easter egg. And just, anyways, without getting too off track here, very, very cool track going on. And not to mention also, I only found this out recently, most of his textures that he takes are from this game called Worms. I'm not sure how much of it's taken from there, but at least for me, the visual experience for this track is just really well put together, as is pretty much any Metabus track, right? Online, for this gameplay, I'd imagine that we're mostly going to be seeing a bunch of stuff like backs and stuff on these, especially tight sections here, that lead to a lot of time gain for the person first. So the running power, at least on this track, is going to be very, very strong. But again, I really love that type of theming, so at least for me, I'm getting really excited just seeing this. But not too much really else to say here. It's just a very, very simple track, but in a nice way. Metabus tracks normally, at least one of the complaints that you'll hear about them, right, is with stuff like Banished Keep. Players will complain that there's too much going on, the track is too reliant on strats, and you need to learn the strats and have the knowledge to fix that. And with Shy Guy Lumberco, a bit less so, and we'll get into that obviously more later when that comes up, right? But this track completely says screw that to both those. We're gonna make it incredibly simple and just purely driving based. So I really love it. I think it's nice and simple. It's a really I don't know, it's one of those tracks similar to Crafty Castle and to Rune and Peach's Castle, where it's just I get a chance to breathe and actually think about tracks. Great job here, Metabus. I really fucking love the work you did here, and I hope to see another one of this in the future after your next project with... maybe I shouldn't leak that here, but excited to see it after that. with Blissful Block, this was the first release Strobens has made in around 10 or 11 years, right? And I think I can speak for most people to say that we were very shocked to see him return. There was this sort of question when we were coming back to seeing Strobens tracks, right? It's considering how old they were, like, could an author that was around so long ago, like, adapt to the modern CT scheme? And I think Blissful Block is just an incredible job at doing that. There's a lot of just complexity elements that have changed over the last 10 or 11 years, right? Oftentimes we've had people ask for more complex or intricate tracks, and I think this one really delivers, especially on that. The actual gameplay and driving itself isn't necessarily too complicated. There's no massive shroomless cuts or difficult shroom cuts to perform or anything like that. It's a purely like driving and gameplay based one. It's a track that you can actually have a lot of player interaction on, and it's a track that also adds some sort of depth though outside of that, right? It doesn't become boring to drive. The actual track has a ton of different routes that you can take each lap. So we already passed the lap 1, but there's a lap 2 and a lap 3 route. There's various shortcuts that can sort of combine the routes. It's a lot more of a knowledge-based track as opposed to you're going to spend 10 hours grinding some TTs and then spam pick it online to abuse, right? The actual gameplay itself too, the driving aspect, I found incredibly fun. There's no very like unforgiving sections of the track, if that makes sense. It's very, very smooth and relaxed to drive. There's no pace locks, there's no cycles or anything like that that really will get into the way of enjoying your experience driving this thing. Now, as for how it'll play online, I don't really know. I think honestly it's going to be a pretty decent runner, and there's going to be a lot of potential here for breaking away from the pack, but that being said, I don't think that necessarily like, changes how I view the track at all. If anything, I prefer those types of tracks more because it actually leads to some really impactful interactions. And visually, again, for this one, I'm not an author, so it's hard to describe a lot of this stuff, especially when I know there's some crazy stuff going on. It's probably the 100th time or so I've said that at this point, right? But, like, at least for me, it really develops a theme quite well. It reminds me of, like, sort of California beach aesthetic. I'm not sure if that's what he's going for or not, or California suburbs that might be a little bit better. Maybe even farther south, maybe this is more like Mexico City sort of environment, but at least for me, I was really sort of enveloped in this scene. I took around maybe 8 hours or so TTing this. When I was setting the time at first, maybe a little less. I forget. It was a long time. My only complaint about this track at all is the little curbs at the beginning are QML. But again, aside from that, like the route changes, the different like split paths you can take, everything on this track is just absolutely incredible, and it leads to some really, really cool gameplay interactions. Incredible job, Strobens, especially for your first track in 10, 11 years. Really excited to see you come back after all that, and again, nice job on 8th place for Blissful Block. I know this is probably what most people would consider a lot higher than the track deserves, and I'm not trying to get all, like, emotional or anything over this, right? But for me, Meteor Shower is more than the actual track. Is the track deserving of being, like, higher placed than Grand Archives or any of that? Probably not. Right, but for me, it's more than what the actual, like, driving experience is. When I sat down and played this track for probably close to 10 or so hours, it was the longest time I think I've ever spent at this point on a track outside of CGP when I was playing this, and it gave me a lot of time to think about it, because the overwhelming reception of this was vastly negative, and it kind of confused me, because I went to this with a very open mind, but I think there's a lot of people that are very inclined to push shit out that they don't necessarily think about in terms of gameplay. People are inclined to say that like a 3-second drop or 4-second drop, whatever that was there, or a tunnel like this with a shitload of boost panel, really weird KCL to drive on and all that is bad, or broken or whatever, right? But a lot of the times it's just like, oh, we can't control our vehicle on, or something like that, whereas we're still like spam picking melting or something, right? It's point is, like, there's a lot of that type of shit in the pack, and we're being incredibly selective over what we like and what we don't, and kind of arbitrarily drawing these boundaries. Is this track broken and has a shitload of bugs and stuff? Yeah, you know it does. We all do, and there's no denying that, right? And saying that is one thing, but at least for me, I started to sort of question as I was playing this track, like, why do we sort of consider certain things to be good or bad in a track? I would even go so far as to say that, like, visually it's easier to determine than it is, like, gameplay-wise, what is good or bad. We just passed over a 6-second shortcut, right? Is that bad for the track? I mean, it's one shortcut, so people would usually say that's too strong or whatever, but one of the tracks that we hail as one of the best of all time has, like, a 13-second fucking golden cut, right? And, like, mega boxes and all this other type of crazy-ass shit, right? But we're so, like, inclined to just say that this is gonna be shit because of stuff like that, or because of a massive drop or whatever. But I think everybody in this like, entire community, you know, comp, authors, everybody alike needs to kind of just fucking play stuff and actually think about it more critically and be more open to stuff. We're so pessimistic and negative on tracks, I think, as a group, and when I posted this thread, I just felt the exact same way, and I really do understand sort of the feelings that go along with that, and I can't imagine what it's like also for a creator to feel that type of shit, right? Like, I mean, you put, like, idea or thought into a track, and is this track great or perfect? No, right? Is it broken? Yeah, it's fucking, like, really fucking broken, right? But, like, the amount of thought and effort I think that went into this is crazy, and the actual track itself, people just don't want to give a shot, and it makes me sad. But yeah, that's Meteor Shower. It really is just, it deserves so much more than it's gotten. This track has really been through probably everything at this point. It started off as Celestial Speedway, and I guess, yeah, it's technically a separate track, but it's entirely inspired from that, right? And that was almost 2 years ago or so at this point. And this track really has just been through pretty much everything with adaptations, and I honestly, like, and this might be a little blasphemous here, but I did not rate Bugsy half as good as an author as I did until I saw this final version. Like, and sorry for the flame, bro, but, like, genuinely, this is so insanely good. And I was completely blown away, because I'd played the other versions, but I don't know what about this specific version really made me, like, super interested in the track. Maybe it's like the stars that are, you know, sort of lit up in the rainbow sections, or maybe it's that extra section we just passed through there with the skate park, or whatever the fuck you want to call it. Something with the packages, man. Or maybe it's this little shroom cut here, which I know was, like, unintended to take it that way, but, like, I didn't really realize, like, how fucking cool a lot of the shit was on this track until I played it again recently. And for real, like, visually, I think this is, like, one of the best I've seen, maybe even ever. I don't know, man. It totally brings the entire environment to life, and the sort of, I think, theming that you were going for really just nails it right here. But again, you're making a comp player right now talk about, like, visuals and shit like that for the track instead of actually talking about the driving. Like that's how much like it really blew me away. Just really insane fucking work with that, man. But let's take this lap to focus on the driving here. The start here, there's the one complaint I'd say is there's maybe a bit too much boost, but it flows so well together. Like I don't think it's even worth trying to address. Like every single section, this low right here, which I didn't get this lap, but I got lap 1, is really cool to get. This little 2-shroom cut here, you don't actually do in the TT, but it provides some nice little balance for a little bit of a lap 1 cut there, because normally this section might seem a little bit dull without it, but the actual design for that cut is really cool and kind of brings the section to life, I'd say. This shroom was just really unique. No trick on that, and you landed a slip. Super fucking cool idea. The shroom cut, honestly, in the first live section I like a bit more than the second one, but this is still really fucking cool because it brings you this little top route and you get a little bird's eye view of a lot of the city. I don't know, man, like, gameplay-wise here, the driving is super smooth. The little moving slow ramps for, I think it was Squire's comp, originally, that you implemented those for, really fitting well there. This shroomless is really interesting to take. I'm not sure how that'll go online in terms of blocking or whatever, but I guess we'll see. And honestly, this ending section that we're going into here with the curves, I would not have expected something, this good, even from, like, a very, like, highly regarded gameplay, like competitive author. It just flows so well together. That trick that you get off the wall is really smooth. The little hop onto the curb here at the end as well. I don't know, man, like, you really blew me away with this one. It's gonna be really hard to top this shit because it really is incredible. Amazing work, Bugsy, man. You really fucking killed it with this one. When I first saw Strobens drop this video for the Chrono Cup that included this track, my jaw actually dropped watching the transition here that happens on this course near the end of lap 2. I don't know how you're able to implement something so smoothly. He explained it, but it all went fucking over my head. I don't know how you can get that transition so smooth. And we'll talk about gameplay really fast because lap 1 is a lot of the interesting gameplay stuff. The water current that moves a bunch of different directions as well, pushing the penguins is really funny. That double trick that you can get there because the KCL that also exists on the water slope. This shroom cut also, though, not intended, and incredibly satisfying to do. It is probably my favorite shroom cut of the year. Just like super smooth, neutral hop. Oh, it's great. But again, now that we've finished all the cuts, let's go back to talk about the visuals here. Because, it's not necessarily much to look at here. I like the sort of pillars, the broken down, sort of like almost Greek aesthetic. At least for me, it kind of brings a lot of that part to adds a little bit more depth than what would normally just be like a grass surface with some drivable road, right? This water section with the rocks, it's very interesting. At least for me, because you can take that bottom path and top path and then relatively similar speeds because the water current pushes you pretty fast. I'd highly recommend, if any of you speak Spanish, Strobens has a full tutorial I found out about yesterday where he actually made this track mostly in the tutorials. If you want to watch that, you can. And something I haven't included, which I know authors are very excited about, the animation for the actual cryovolcano you can see there in that shot. Is done with SHP0. It's some elf. I don't know, man. It's some new animation type. Yay! And I guess it's like really difficult, and it looks fucking sick. So I really appreciate it, at least. But yeah, this track is really fucking cool, man. And it honestly, like, if it didn't have a lot of that transition stuff that it has with the, not only like the ice driving but the visual as well, it would still be a great track. But that just brings it so much more to life. And again, thematically, just insane. Absolutely love this one, and if it wasn't for such an incredible year, this would be probably number 1. Great work, man. I was told to play this track several times, and I never really gave it a chance until a couple months ago, and I wish I did earlier, to be honest. This is an incredibly difficult track to drive, but once you get everything flowing well, it is so smooth. For me, I think the coolest thing about this track, though, isn't necessarily the visual or the theming. And again, the theming is incredible, right? With the idea of, you have climate change or whatever, right? And it's going to melt all the ice and, get all the penguins at the end kicked out of their homes. But the cool thing, at least for me, is the driving and gameplay of this track. There are 4 shroom cuts on this track. There are a lot of item sets to the point where you can actually get shroom glitch, I think, pretty easily on this track. It's definitely happened before. And you can probably abuse that, but again, not necessarily focusing on that, but gameplay-wise, there's 4 shroom cuts, and they all save a fair bit of time, right? So it's going to lead to probably one of those tracks we see with a better version of DMS, if you would, where the shortcuts actually save a fair bit of time, but the tech and the driving on the track also, it's hard to shroom up really elsewhere on the track to gain time, and you're going to have people failing left and right. And even though we've only seen this for a couple weeks or so at this point, it's definitely sort of lent itself to that sort of vibe, especially when we've seen it played online. More about the actual track theming, though, at least for me. The transition, if you actually look around here from this fire area to this area, the people are actually making bombs down there. I don't know who did that animation. I think Tarza did a fair bit of it. And even if she didn't, I'm still gonna say Tarza did, because she never wants to take credit for shit. She really should. This oil slick flow here too, really cool. The refraction of the light to make it that rainbow color, I think, is really interesting. This mogul cut, I have never gotten a stick on it. I'm told it's really satisfied if you do, but it's a really nice sort of cut off the mogul there, because you don't have to shroom to get up. It's not super bullshitty. It can't be accidentally done shroomless or whatever. The design there was very good. And again, this beginning section here with this shroomless, well, it is a little tricky, and I think the fire snake might be a bit of extra difficulties. You saw me there hitting the wall. I do think it's actually quite fun to do, and it is balanced, again, very well. Unlike a lot of the tracks that we've seen earlier in this sort of list, I actually didn't really think of this one too much in a visual standpoint, even though, again, the visuals are great. This actually feels like a CT track that is meant to be raced and warred on. It feels like a competitive track, right? And because of that, I was able to appreciate it through a very different lens than I would with normal ones. So, as a result, I think I appreciate and can rate this track a lot higher than I normally would, just because of the crazy amount of thought and shit that went into a lot of these sections in this tech here. These penguins, by the way, those do suck. I really hate the penguins. They are super evil. Maybe that's the theme. Maybe they're just mad because they got kicked out of their housing here by Bowser. Great work on the track, both of you. It was really enjoyable to play, and we look forward to seeing Toadstool Dynasty get finished. Finish that shit. Seriously, we need that finished. So, full warning in advance, I'm not really going to talk about gameplay too much on this one because there's just so much other stuff to talk about, but just to get it out of the way, a lot of shroom cuts before canon, they're pretty cool. A lot of shroom cuts after canon, they're also pretty cool. And it'll lead to hopefully pretty balanced races even with cannon shocks. But with that out of the way, this track does better than any track I've ever seen in terms of enveloping the player in an actual world that isn't just fucking Mario Kart. Right? I didn't know this was involved or associated with any movie before I was playing this. You can forgive me for that if you will, or not, if you really are diehard about that, but I had no fucking idea. And I played this for several hours, and I was like, holy shit, this is so fucking cool. And then I actually, for the first time ever, decided to watch the film that was associated with it, and it was really good. And it helped, it helped develop my sort of sense of understanding for the track even more. Like this section here, which is supposed to be like some mine shaft for the little gems that light up from the little sky gems or whatever it is in the fucking film, it just looks really, really fucking cool. And like it follows the actual progression of the character throughout the movie. Like they get chased or something down some mine shaft, basically they're on some rail cart, and they find the little gem place, and they get captured and brought to the ship here, and they actually go to the castle in the sky right here, and that transition out of the cannon is just beautiful. Like, holy shit, man, I get goosebumps still watching over that stuff. It's crazy. These little things are like the giants from the story that shoot lasers out of their eyes and blow shit up. The little grass and plants and stuff you generally just see around, along with these blue tiled walls in Laputa. There's the little gemstone, obviously, at the end, which we haven't gotten there yet, but the point is, not only is it themed around a story, which we've seen before, or themed around even like a franchise like Dragon Knight's Island, for example, right? It actually follows the fucking storyline, and for me, that's just so fucking good, man. Like, you just don't see that stuff ever, do you? Like, it's just, I don't know. I've never seen like that much detail taken with the track, and not to mention the actual driving on it too is really, really good. So I don't think we've ever really seen that, nor will we ever see something this good again, in terms of combining that theme with an actual good drive and following the whole fucking storyline. Just an incredible job here by MMKDS. Really, just, I don't know, man. You can't do this again. It's too good. It's too good to happen again. The fact that this track started development in early 2022 and just recently got into the pack, well, not even recently got into the pack, right, but just recently finished. I know there's a lot of lag issues and all that, but I think that really like epitomizes the sort of creator that Metalist is when it comes to this stuff. It's actual perfection that's being like strove for, right? There's no corners cut, there is no bullshit that's being thrown at you. This is just like very, very meticulously thought out and designed in order to be whatever track he designs. So, for the starters, this track was meant to be similar to Banished Keep, and we talked about this early in development, where he wanted to make a track that was similar to Banished Keep, but tone down the strats a bit, so they're not necessarily essential for players who aren't super practiced with the game, but they can still feel rewarding for a player that is to take them. And for what it's worth, I think this does it absolutely perfectly. There was a lot of very interesting stuff like the shroomless at the beginning here, the shroom cut that you can take multiple different ways, such as like you can do a true shroom variant, you can go wider and take it in a one shroom variant, you can take it in a star, you can do it with TF or not. Like, there is just so much variety and so much depth that he planned out in this. And again, it's more than also just a fucking custom track. Like, I highly recommend, this is probably the best Easter egg I've ever seen on a custom track. Spend some time on it, get a friend, crack a beer. If you're overage, don't do that if you're younger. Don't. This is not a consent to go start drinking if you're underage, but just go and have a complete blast with a few friends looking around this. It is so worth your fucking time. And I think it just goes to show, like, how involved he is as an author and how, just like, I don't know, how you can even try to start creating shit like this in the first place. It really is well done. And I mean, in terms of like the amount of thought that you can put into a track, no author will ever come close to Metalist. He just like not only does he have like the creative sort of sense to be able to think of cool shit like this, right? But he's also able to sort of balance that with what people in competitive scenes would really want to have happen. And as a result, like Banished Keep is the most popular track ever, excluding maybe Peaks, but that's for stupid reasons, right? Like, there's a reason this guy's first ever track really was one of the best tracks we've ever seen, and this track does 100% justice to his name. It's absolutely incredible. Amazing work, man. If you keep making tracks like this, it's going to be impossible to just not put them at the top. And realistically, like, this is a very fair argument to be at the top. There's just so much to say about this one that like goes beyond the pale of any sort of CT we've seen this year. Like, is it as well designed necessarily as like Shy Guy Lumberco, for example? Did it have as much thought maybe put into how the gameplay would be online, for example? Of course not, right? But there's something just about this one that it's entirely different than any other track we've seen pretty much ever. And I don't know if like it's just Strobens just has this unique talent. I guess Spikey kind of does too, to some extent with his tracks, but he throws a bunch of really weird shit together. And I don't just mean visually, I mean gameplay-wise too. We have a ton of different awkward turns, awkward tech and stuff that, you know, and this isn't a flame on Strobens, right? But he's not like an incredible driver or anything. He doesn't know about a ton of the tech that he puts into his tracks. Like 90%, I would say, of the really incredible shit that we get to find on Strobens tracks are just entirely unintentional. And that's not a bad thing. There is just something about his sort of design style or his design philosophy that leads to these types of things coming into tracks. I don't even know how to describe it, man. It's just completely insane seeing something like that. And the entire visual layout of this track as well, like, is just mind-boggling. We've never seen anything like this, right? Like, the complete style for, you know, we're gonna start with a 2011 track, right, or whenever the hell SD1 was made, right? As the very intro to a track that's, 12 years later, is insane and ludicrous, and who the fuck could ever make that work? It's just completely beyond the pale. The Shroomless cuts that we have on that track, including the one we just passed there and the ones at the ending, are both really, really fun to do, and there's stuff that you normally don't see on a track. Like a wheelie moon jump is just not super well used tech, especially one that involves a detach, right? And the Shroomless at the end, it might be a little controversial online, I wouldn't be surprised, but I mean, again, right, it's really, really fun to do, and it's got a consistent method, and it took me a long time to do this. Setting up this video, well, not the entire video, obviously, but setting up this run, this specific TT, took about 10 hours, because I just kept finding more and more shit, and it's just rare to ever have that sort of potential on a track. There's just so much stuff that you can do that isn't even possible on any sort of normal CT on this. So again, like, crazy fucking design elements, right? The use of the like virtual environments and all that is also insane. So I don't even know what else to really add to this. It's so beautiful because it doesn't actually take into consideration a ton of shit, and it manages to pull it all off even better than you can expect. Incredible track, man. This is insane. And on that note, we turn the page from 2023 to 2024. Congratulations to all the authors that made it onto this list. I really enjoyed playing every single one of your tracks, even those that didn't actually end up making it on. But for those that did, it's time for some awards now. Let's go check out some of the awards from this year. For Best Upcoming Author of 2023, I'm gonna have to go to Ice Chris. I know it didn't work out, man, but you're an incredible author and you do a phenomenal job with your tracks. Keep up the amazing work into this next year. The award for Best Visual Track of 2023 goes to Bugsy for his work on Starry Cityscape. I've heard you're really good at lighting, but I didn't really actually get to realize it until I saw this track in person. Incredible work, man. The Best Driving Design of 2023 goes to Cottony and Tarso for their work on 4F. Just an actually incredible track, especially for people that say they can't drive well. Really, it blew my socks off. Good shit. The Best Theme Design for 2023 goes to Multi Mario Kart DS and Kane the Snowman for their work on Castle in the Sky. I've never been so enveloped in a track before. Incredible stuff. The Best Track Design for 2023 has to go to Metabus for his insane work on SGLC. He is the most meticulous author I have ever met, and to spend over a year of his life on this track is absolutely insane dedication. Amazing work, man. And on that note, the Best Author of 2023 goes to Strobens. The amount of insane work and dedication this guy's put in over this last year of his return has been immense. He's released every single track into the top 10, and it's just insane to see anyone with that amount of consistency, especially someone who's just come back after a large break. You really have to find the meta and have broken all the boundaries of what CT Creation has had in store, and I'm immensely excited for what you release in 2024. And on that note, we close out the year 2023 in the custom track community. It really was an incredible year, and as sort of my first year really involved in a lot of this track creation aspect, it gave me a lot of perspective into the creation of actual custom tracks and how much more complicated it really is than I think most people look into. Thank you everyone for watching the video. Have an amazing new year.